Thank you for joining us, Asutosh, who is the Asutosh Padhi, who is the senior partner and head of global firm strategy for McKinsey worldwide. He was also the managing partner for McKinsey North America. Welcome to this interview, Asutosh. As you know, the global economy and the world is in a state of flux, great flux, uncertain, and volatile. As you talk to CEOs worldwide, what are you hearing from them, and what is your message and advice to them on how to maneuver and navigate this environment?
George, great to be with you. I've been spending a lot of time with CEOs around the world, and I'd say two topics are consistently the same in terms of what's on the minds of CEOs and boards. The first one is geopolitics. Given all the uncertainty around tariffs, around trade, around corridors, that's topic number one. Topic number two is actually AI and the impact of AI, the disruptive impact. We're at the very, very beginning stages of what we're going to witness with AI. It's going to be one of the most important forces of our lifetime as we look at what's staring ahead of us right now. In terms of both of this, I would say that the perspectives actually are vary quite uniquely by company. In terms of geopolitics, what we're telling CEOs is one, have a perspective around what is the implication of geopolitics for your particular institution. What we call this a value creation thesis. What's your value creation thesis? What does it imply in terms of your strategy, your customer footprint, your supply chain, and your operating footprint, your back office? On AI, I think that we're saying that it is impossible to actually have a long-term 5-year strategy on AI. Our view is that the fastest learners will actually win. And so, what are the set of things that you all are going to do, what the CEOs and institutions will do to start to realize real benefits from AI, but in a very practical, applied approach, as opposed to a long term, multi horizon planning?
I assume that Indian companies are perhaps not as evolved on AI as some of the other global companies. Is that correct, or what do you hear from the Indian CEOs?
So, George, I would say that first, let me start with the adoption of AI, just more globally, and then I'll come to India. Just globally, we are at a very, very early stage of adoption of companies. Often we hear from CEOs that see the impact of AI everywhere except in the bottom line. And globally, what we are seeing is there's probably about 10% of the companies that are starting to see real business outcomes from AI, meaning that they're starting to see top line revenue growth, margin improvement, cash flow improvement, customer satisfaction, employee satisfaction, other metrics that really matter. Now, if you look at where we stand, I think I think that there's probably in that 10%, there are definitely companies from India as well that are in that category. Structurally, there is absolutely nothing that prevents Indian companies from actually getting to that 10% and even being part of that 1%. I think in my conversations, what we're realizing that what the best companies and the best CEOs are doing is they're starting to frame it not as a technology opportunity, but as a business opportunity. So they're asking the business unit leaders to come back and start to say, what are the applications of AI? And how do you start to see this? And we're seeing a whole host of those types of opportunities now.
When you come back to India, over the last 30 odd years of liberalization of the Indian economy, we still find that a significant majority of contribution to the Indian economy is coming from Indian conglomerates, and MNCs are perhaps lagging behind in their contribution to Indian economy and development. Why is it so? And what would your advice be to the MNCs that are operating in India now?
So, George, at this point in time, I'm probably speaking to about a dozen or so MNCs that are actually looking at India seriously as an opportunity. I think the way this includes an insurance company, this includes a semiconductor company, this includes an automotive supplier. It's across a very, very broad spectrum of institutions. I think there is two things that are important if you're a global company looking at India. The first one is the materiality. Materiality meaning, can India become so anywhere between, let's say, 10 to 20% of the total enterprise value of the company in a certain time frame, 5 to 10 years? That's point one. Point two is competitiveness, right? We look at it and say, when you establish your footprint in India, is that going to be globally competitive, right? And you look at it along fundamental factors like capital, like talent, like technology, and everything. And then you come back and say, where does India's competitiveness, and it varies specifically by company and by industry, stand relative to the global set? If you can do both of those things, India suddenly starts to become a very, very attractive opportunity. I will also say the following, which is globally, multinational companies are really looking at growth. And as they look at growth opportunities, India has been the fastest growing country in the world for the last 4 years. And you look at it growing ahead is projected to continue to be very, very attractive. So they almost have to come back and answer the question at some point, why not India as opposed to why India?
You, along with your colleagues, have pioneered this concept of titanium economy. Uh, what is the relevance of that for Indian business groups? Uh, Primarily because, over the last decade or two or more, Indian manufacturing has not done that well as far as the services are concerned. So, how do you think the titanium economy concept will help Indian companies?
So I think the titanium economy concept is actually very, very relevant to India. Let me first describe what it is. We started to look at what are the companies that fundamentally drive innovation in the United States. There was a lot of focus around the technology companies in the West Coast, the Big Seven, the Big Eight, etc. That's really are the companies that are often in the news. In my work and the work of my colleagues from McKinsey around the United States, what we noticed is that there was another segment where the real innovation happened. There's 6,000 odd companies, 80% of them are private owned, and these are typically companies that are much smaller. These are not the companies that make it to the front page of the Wall Street Journal or CNBC. But they actually work on products that are really important. In the course of any given day, we often put up a page with a number of different logos and ask them if anyone recognizes it. But in that given day, actually, people have actually used products from that company without actually having known it. So we call this titanium because we said it's durable, it's resistant, it's around us, and yet you don't see it. That's the reason for it. These companies actually drive about uh, about 60% of the R&D and about two-thirds of the exports from the United States from a manufacturing standpoint. Now, why is it relevant to India? Because these are companies that typically the success formula here is companies that are focused around specific areas with deep specialization. These are not the most capital intensive industries, but companies that start to build distinctive brands, products, and technologies. And that is why I think this idea about focusing in on area, having to starting to use actually go back to AI for a second to drive world-class levels of productivity and competitiveness. I actually think it'd be terrific for both for India and for the world if India was going to have a thriving titanium economy.
You know, the Indian software industry has been one of the biggest winners from as a sector from India and even globally. Now, with the world economy as flux, and specifically the U.S. Economy, where the Indian software companies have been major players. How do you think it will impact these software companies, the changes that are there now, for example, with the visas, with the immigration policies in the US? How do you think they should navigate this environment?
George, I have two thoughts. Right? If I pull back and look at it, I think you talked about, I was in India, and I go back to the original days of the IT services industry, way back in early 2000, when the industry was being the term was being coined and framed, and then we had remarkable success with all the companies from India. My own view is that it is now poised for change, and it's changed in a couple of dimensions. Obviously, you've got some of the geopolitical aspects, but I think that those will settle out at some point, right, as the policies become clearer. I actually think the bigger change is actually going to be technology, is going to be AI. And what is the impact of AI for the Indian IT services industry? There's two ways you can approach this. One is to go back and say this actually becomes a real threat for the industry. We're now hearing about situations where 80% of the code can actually be written using AI. That fundamentally changes the role of what programmers do, right? But the other part of it is the opportunity, right? And I've often asked the question, why does the next DeepSeek, for example, not come from India, right? You go back and look at the rate of development of technologies and AI. Why should India not have a pole position in terms of the rate and pace of development of AI?
McKinsey Worldwide is turning 100 years in 2026. During these 100 years, especially since you're guiding the firm's strategy for the next perhaps couple of decades, what has been the major challenges that McKinsey has faced in these 100 years? And what do you think the outlook should be for McKinsey in the future?
So, George, I think, as you know, very few institutions, and especially professional services institutions, actually get to turn to be 100. So we feel incredibly fortunate and incredibly privileged to be a part of an institution that turns 100. Look, let me start with what doesn't change. I think what doesn't change is our mission. Our mission is around how do we continue to help clients make substantial improvements in the performance enduring. And second, how do we continue to attract the best talent? Those two things will never change. I think the thing that as we look at it, if we look at McKinsey, I think we've been through our own journey over the past several years. I think when I joined McKinsey, we were largely an institution that served private sector clients, and we did it on topics, let's say, from strategy and organization. I fast forward the clock 30 years from now to today. We now serve the private sector, the social sector, the public sector. We have a global footprint that has actually expanded. Our range of capabilities has expanded, earlier from strategy and organization to operations to technology to transformation. And I think with that, I think is really the opportunity. But I think the thing that I think most important for us as a firm as we go forward, I think there are two or three things that we're working to right now. One is distinctiveness, which is how does McKinsey continue to be stand for preeminence, which is we always should be solving the toughest problems with the world's best talent. I think that is one part of it. The second is repositioning ourselves for the age of AI and saying, how do we really make that the next big chapter for us? And the third one is continuing to evolve and work on our talent model. McKinsey has historically been a leadership factory where I think a number of our colleagues, whether if you stay in McKinsey, whether you leave McKinsey, our proposition has always been that you will develop in McKinsey at a faster rate and pace than you would anywhere else. How do we continue to retain that?
What do you think will be the landscape of management consultancy, both worldwide and in India?
George, I would say that I think it is very, as we look at it going forward, what we are starting to see is that the nature and type of what we are doing, we look at ourselves and we call this, we look at this as a profession. We look at what we do as a profession, not as a business. Now, the crux of where McKinsey stands, if you look at it, there are a large number of competitors that we have out there, and everyone actually would come back and say that in some form or fashion they want to compete with, either compete with or want to compete with McKinsey. The way that we look at it is in a world where there is a lot of uh, there is a lot of complex problems that there are CEOs and leaders who are looking to make significant, who have got high ambitions and who are looking to move their organizations. I think the role that we play is working side by side with them to always ensure that we're leading that the work that we're doing is leading to substantial and enduring improvement, right? That's the role that we actually play. And when you look at that, I think it requires many, many years. It has taken, as I look at myself, it's taken me a lot of time to really understand what the craft of being able to do that is. How do we teach that? We call that apprenticeship for our people. That's very hard for others to replicate. You have to go through a certain number of cycles of doing this to really think through this. The level of expertise that we have in terms of insights, number of the depth around particular industry sectors, around different functional capabilities, and how do you bring that to bear for a specific client? So I think that is the crux of really what we do. And so in that way, I would say that what the work that we do is in many ways, well, there's a large number of players out there. The work that we do and continue to do is continues to be fairly sharply defined, where we have a very specific and a differentiated proposition for our clients.
In India, the Indian conglomerates are growing fast, whereas worldwide we see that conglomerates are shrinking. Why do you think this is happening? And what do you think about how Indian conglomerates should move forward?
So, George, in my discussions with companies in India, we start. I think I'm always positively struck as I travel around the world and I look at sort of different geographies. The thing that's always refreshing for me is the degree of ambition that I see with companies. The ability to go back and say, we're going to go after some bolder targets, that it's going to be much higher than the typical rate of growth, and here's how we're going to achieve it. And then putting together extraordinary focus and talent to be able to do that. Now, interestingly, in India, a lot of that has continued to happen to conglomerates. But I will also go back when I was starting up with McKinsey in 1995. If you look at, for example, the startup space, that we did not have any unicorns at that point in time. And look at how fundamentally different, like with InMobi and others, right? With how that landscape has changed. We had the first one, and now we have multiple of those types of new ventures that are actually starting up, and the capability and the talent and the degree of ambition and the pace and rate at which they're moving is actually incredibly, incredibly strong. So look at this and say, personally, for me, it feels less like a conglomerate versus no conglomerate. I think I'm really struck by how vibrant the new venture space is, by how fast startups are happening, and how the economics. What I mean by that, the cost to do a startup has fallen by almost 50 times over the last 8 or 9 years in India, and that itself will set the foundation for where we go going forward.
There has been some feedback on the state of Indian startups to say that, perhaps as much as 75 to 80% fail, and it's only the 20% that becomes unicorns and big companies. What would your advice be to Indian startups on how to scale and how to bring about endurance for the firm?
George, I think globally, if you look at really new ventures, and if you look at and talk to a venture capitalist, for example, in Silicon Valley, what they would say is that typically out of every 100 startups they do, there's probably two or three that really become like really big and successful. There's probably another certain number that just do okay, and there's a large number that actually fail, right? So I think this is part of the innovation is actually failure. We look at this and say there's two types of failure. One is like a failure where you actually go back and say, are you actually learning from it? And does that make you stronger and better the next time? That is failure that I think we'll need to celebrate. That is not something to be scared of, right? It's very hard to do difficult things if you're not pushing yourself. If you're not failing, it also means you're not pushing yourself hard enough, right? So without that, it probably means we're not at the edges of what we're doing. The other part of it is just, we failed, we didn't learn something, we made the same mistake. That part is the part to be avoided. But I think there's an aspect of failure which really teaches us how to get better and better. And that's something we should really celebrate.
You have been perhaps a lifer McKinsey employee and partner. Uh, what did it take you to stay in the firm for such a long while?
George, it's a great question. When I joined McKinsey, my initial offer was for 2 years, and I think I just completed 30 years with McKinsey. I think it's an extraordinary firm. I still am as excited about getting to work every day as I was. I love what I do in McKinsey. And why is that? Because one, I get to work on really interesting problems. I get to work with individuals, clients that I'm really excited about. I do this in an environment with like friends and colleagues of mine. I call them McKinsey partners. Get to work with extraordinary talent, and I have enormous professional freedom and flexibility in how I do this, all in a values-based environment. So look at this, and even till today, I think, go back and say this is really an extraordinary place from which you can actually make a difference, positive difference to the world. And I will also say in the last 30 years, there haven't been too many days where I have not personally felt challenged. And it's always the degree of like learning and being challenged, constantly challenged every day has always continued for me.
In a CEO's career or in successful business leaders, there are people like you who've stayed in one company for a long while and come to the top. There are others like Indra Nui who has shifted from company to company and then finally ending up with Pepsi. To the youngsters who are joining into the consulting and business world, what would your advice be? Should they stay in one firm or should they stay in multiple firms and then grow? Any advice from you?
George, I would say there's multiple pathways to being successful in your life, right? One, you have to define what success really means for yourself, but there's multiple pathways to be successful. You can do this by working inside an institution like McKinsey and having multiple chapters of personal and professional growth inside McKinsey. In my last 30 years, I've had like maybe six different chapters of growth inside the firm, right? They've never been the same geographic, leading up operations practice, leading North America, et cetera. They're different. Equally, we'd look at it and say, like for people, we have a number of our alums who stayed in McKinsey for a period of time and then went on and did extraordinarily successful things. Many of them, like this, over 800 people who are McKinsey alums who are now CEOs of prominent institutions and so on. And they'd all come back and say that McKinsey as a place was actually an accelerator for them. To the folks, I would say that what really matters is the ability to be able to make a real difference to whatever you're doing today. And second, constantly being on this journey towards learning. I think the world is changing so fast, it's impossible to predict where it's going to go. And the people who are able to learn the fastest are going to be the people who are going to be the most successful.
You have been an IIT and an IIM graduate. Uh, what did McKinsey teach you that IIMs and IITs have not taught you?
It's a great question. I would let me just frame it. I would say that IITs and IIMs really played a very important role to prepare me for McKinsey. When I got to IIT, my number one thought was that I was never ever going to be the smartest person in the room ever again. And I learned that the only way to do it is to is to be much more humble and be in the mindset not of having the right answer, but about listening and engaging with people. I learned that very quickly at IIT because of the extraordinary talent and people who surrounded me. When I went to IIM, this was in 1993. This was at a period where India was actually liberalizing. And every day you'd get up in the morning, you'd read the Times, then you'd read the different newspapers. I remember reading the Business Today, I remember reading the Economic Times, and so on. And the world was changing around us, and it opened up the eyes to the possibilities of where it could. Now, nobody could have predicted where India would be 30 years down the line or where the world was going to be. But to me, both of those were, I went to IIT Kanpur, I went to IIM-Ahmedabad. I'm incredibly grateful to both places for the preparation that I got out of it, both going into it as well as coming out of it, and how that helped me prepare me for a lifetime in McKinsey.
One last question from my side. There have been many reports in the media social media and otherwise, about how you are perhaps in the running for the head of McKinsey globally. Uh, any feedback on that? Any comments on that?
George, I would say McKinsey is a partnership. We've got many extraordinary colleagues, and I think we have who are like extraordinarily gifted and talented. I'd come back and say that's how I get to work every day. I work with people who are like really gifted, really special, and all of whom are making a big difference to a firm. Our structure is different than that of a corporation. We are a partnership, we're a global partnership. And I frankly feel lucky to be a part of the McKinsey's global family partnership.
Do you think the partnership model in consulting and auditing firms need to change or evolve, or is this something of a model that will go on for quite some time?
So let me not speak about audit. Let me talk about consulting and then specifically talk about McKinsey. For us, we sometimes say partnership is a choice, but it's not really a choice. Why is that? Because for us, the what we do is really we need extraordinary talent. It will be impossible for us to retain to get to the level of talent, and that means we've got 750 senior partner colleagues around the world, all of whom have to be really have to be energized and who have to see that they're making a difference to the world. There's no corporate structure that allows for us to get to the degree of talent that we actually want or need. So for us, we're absolutely committed to a model of partnership. For those of us who have lived it, we've seen the real strengths of what a partnership. It's very different than what a traditional corporation is, in terms of hierarchies and so on. But it's an incredibly special model. It's an incredibly powerful model, and our view is it will absolutely endure. And we really don't have a choice. We will have to evolve it. We will continue to make changes. But I think it's absolutely the fabric of McKinsey.
Thank you very much, Asutosh, uh, for giving us this time. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.